welcome back. By the time you see this video, it will be 2024, so Happy New Year! In this video, I'm going to be making a kilt. Now, Rick and I had a wonderful opportunity to go to Scotland in October of 2023, and we went with two other couples who were family members, and we had a wonderful time. Scotland is absolutely beautiful, and we toured Edinburgh Castle, and we went to Rosslyn Chapel, and if any of you have read the book The Da Vinci Code or saw the movie, you may be familiar with this chapel. It was breathtaking and so worth it to see it. We walked the Royal Mile. We did at the Highlands tour. We went to Glencoe. It was beautiful and amazing. And we also took a boat trip on Loch Ness. And no, darn it, we didn't see Nessie, but we did keep an eye out, but we didn't see her. Anyway, when we came home, I decided that I wanted to make a kilt. Now, I do come from Scottish ancestry, and I have a great uncle, Robert Bob McLean, and he wore a kilt and he played the bagpipes, and he lived in Canada. And when I was a very little girl, my mom snapped this photo of him during a family reunion. And so I ordered our clan tartan directly from Scotland, McLean, and it took an entire month to get it. So I'm a little late getting this video out because of that. I am really looking forward to making this kilt, and I can't wait to see how it comes out. So let's get started. I ordered my pattern on Amazon. Now, this is not a normal pattern where you have tissue paper pieces that you have to cut out and lay on your fabric. It's all done with instructions only. My first step was to take my measurements. I needed my waist measurement, and I needed to measure the widest part of your bottom around your hips. And then I needed to measure from my waist down to the widest part of my bottom because this will be my foul. Then I measured from my waist down to the floor because I want my kilt to end at the knee. The pattern that I am following in order to make this kilt skirt says when you're ordering your fabric that if you order 30 inches of fabric, you will need 4 yards, and that will give you one long continuous piece of fabric. However, if you order it in 60-inch width, you only need 2 yards, and then you cut it in half. And that's what I did because it's more cost effective. I needed to determine the right side of the fabric from the wrong side. The wrong side will have little bumps on top. The right side has a diagonal in the weave that goes from left to right. And I marked the right side of my pattern with an X. This is the only way that I could really figure this out, how to cut this fabric in my mind. I know that I want my finished product from the top of the waistband all the way down to my finished hemline is 20 inches. I have to subtract 1.5 inches for the waistband, which gives me 18.5. I add a 1/2 inch for the seam allowance, which gives me 19 inches. I add 2 more inches for the hem. So 21 inches is where I'm going to cut this fabric. And I don't mind telling you, I am terrified to cut this because it's beautiful fabric that was, not cheap, and I don't want to mess this up. So here we go. I have folded my material in half and marked with chalk at the top where I need to cut off the excess, making sure that the salvaged edge is at the bottom of my fabric, and the part that I cut off at the top will be used for the waistband. Before I sew my 2 seams together, I want to double check to make sure that I have this right. So my X's show that this is the right side of the fabric, so they're lined up. I can also tell by the grain, the way the fabric is going. My salvaged edges are together and my pattern is lining up. I purchased this fabric from an online company called Scottish Kilt, and it did come directly from Scotland, and it took about a month to get it, as an aside. So if you are interested in purchasing any material, you want to allow about a month for it to get to you if you live here in the United States, like I do. So what they did, which was awesome, is that they were very generous, and instead of giving me 2 yards, they gave me almost 3 yards of fabric, even though I only paid for 2. So I have a lot extra. So now what I need to do is take where I sewed this together, and I need to measure out 2 yards on this side of my seam and 2 yards on this side, and that will give me the 4 yards that I need of fabric for this kilt skirt. I'd also like to add that if you're making a traditional kilt, especially a men's kilt, you would want to use 6 yards of fabric. However, for the kilt skirt that I am making, the pattern that I'm using calls for 4 yards. So hopefully this will be enough fabric to still make a nice fully pleated kilt. I am hemming the bottom of my kilt by hand, being very careful to just pick up a couple of threads from underneath. That way, when you flip it over, you have a nice, clean apron front, and you can't even tell where it's been stitched. I'm going to iron my fabric to get out any creases and wrinkles from when it was shipped, and also press down my hem. You'd absolutely want to iron this on the wrong side, the underside. And you want to use a pressing cloth to put over top of it so that you do not damage the delicate fibers in this fabric. I am starting with the under apron first. And the first thing I did was put an X on here to show that this is my under apron. That's just my symbol I'm going to use. Next, we're going to measure 3 inches in, which is going to be the facing, which means it's going to be folded under and hemmed. So this is my 3 inches for facing. And then I need to mark my 1/2 inch seam allowance, which just so happens to be this white line. Another great thing about sewing with tartan, this is literally it right here. I folded in my 3 inch facing and put a pin in it. Now my under apron is going to be 17 inches, which actually lines up perfectly with this stripe right here. Now I need to find my center point of this, and it just so happens that it is right here, and this is my center point. And you really do want even though this is going to be on the underside, you do want a predominant stripe down the center, so this works great. Here's my center line. Now I'm going to mark the hip line, which is about 5 inches for me. We need to create an A-line for the under apron and the over apron. So I've unfolded my facing, and I put some pins here to show my marks because it's hard even to see with the chalk. But what I need to do is measure in 1 1/4 inches so that on both sides, so that I can bring this in slightly to create my A-line. After looking at this a little more closely, I decided that 1 1/4 inches was more than what I wanted to take this in, so I let it out a little bit at the top and redrew my line. So now I've just pinned in place the facing, and now you can see my A-line. And now I'm going to do the same to the other side, and then I'm going to start pleating. At this point, I'd like to point out that the directions that came with the skirt give you all kinds of mathematical equations to figure out your center line and your hip line and so on and so forth. They're difficult to follow. I am the first one to say I have no idea what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to do the best I can with this, and so I did not follow those mathematical instructions. I took my measuring tape, said this is how wide I want my under apron to be, and that's what I did. I found my center mark and I moved out from there. I knew I wanted my hip line to be at 5 inches, and I marked that. So I have this done. Now this is going to be the inside part of my inner apron, and there is going to be a dart here that I'm going to put in place, and then I'm going to hand sew this, but it's going to go on the underside. this little dart right here before we start our first pleat. So here you can see this is my under apron right here. And up here at the top I have my little dart pinned in place. But the next line, which is going to be an inverted pleat, needs to be straight. I'm figuring this out as I go along. However, I'm trying to keep my pattern lined up in between this inverted pleat, and I'm also trying to make the distance about equal here, as well as keeping the pattern lined up. So now that I have this pinned, I can go ahead and start pinning my knife pleats, which are going to go all the way down. Where it gets tricky in trying to follow this pattern is determining how many pleats you are going to have in your kilt. Now, a traditional kilt, like a men's kilt, has many more pleats that are much smaller and uses a lot of material. However, a kilt skirt usually has wider pleats and a little bit more distance between them and not as many. And I'm making the kilt skirt. Okay, so what I'm doing is I am going to pleat to the set, and I am just going to start lining up my pattern and pinning it. And when I get to I'm going to measure the distance that I need to cover the back side where the pleating is, and when I reach that goal, I'm going to stop. And I'm probably going to be cutting some fabric off of this for the over apron to make this fit me. But for me, this is what works. Now I have come to the hardest part of this whole kilt, and that's figuring out how to do the pleating. And I'm going to be honest, this is difficult. I've really played around with this quite a bit to figure this out. Now, in a traditional kilt, the pleats are very small. They're like 1 inch or less, and they're very deep. And then you have to go and flip it over when you're all done and cut all the excess out in the back. However, in a kilted skirt, the pleats can be wider and they don't have to be as deep, and that's what this is. However, when you're pleating to the set, when you get all of your pleating done, it should mimic your front pattern, and mine is just not going to do that. I just don't have enough experience in figuring out how to do this, but this is what I'm doing. I still have my inverted pleat here that you can see, and my pleats are going to be 1.5 inches each. And I think this is a nice size, and I also think it's deep enough to give a nice pleat. So I've done a few so far, but what I'm doing is I'm just marking every 1.5 with my chalk line. And okay, we have 4.5. And so what I'm doing is I'm just taking my material at the first line, I'm folding it on the second line, and I'm pinning it on the third line. And this is giving me pleats that are 1.5 inches wide. And I think for me, this is going to be just fine. Is it going to mimic the pattern on the front perfectly? No, it's not, but that's okay. I am happy with this, and I think it's still going to look beautiful. on the left we have the under apron, which is done. Then of course we have all the pleating, which will go in the back. I only pinned it at the top so far. And then if we swing over to the right, this is the over apron. Now I have excess material for the over apron, and so I need to cut some off. On the over apron, you want a predominant part of your pattern being right in the middle of your over apron. And in order for me to do so, I just have to move the 5 inches here. I need to move this down about 5/8 of an inch, just so that I can make this the predominant stripe right down the middle. Now I'm just going to mark my A line, which is right here. And we're just going to kind of round it off just like this. So this is where we're going to be cutting off the fabric. Well, from here over we're going to add 5 inches. And this is where we're going to cut off our excess fabric right here. So now I'm going to fold this in just like I did on the under apron, the over apron. Just for now, I'm going to pin this into place. And then I'm going to do my little dart up here at the top for my A line. I'm just going to take this in a little bit, and I'm going to hand stitch this with a fell stitch, just like I did the under apron. I've tried the kilt on one more time because I've pinned all of my pleats down in the back, and so I'm just double checking to make sure that everything still looks like it fits. And so far, so good. So my next step is marking my fell line, 5.5 inches, which I'm just doing with this chalk that I have here. This is the line that I'm going to sew on when sewing down my pleats. Now my next step is I'm going to be taking in the waistband just a little bit with each pleat, because you want this to flare out to go around you. The next step is I am just basting all of my pleats into place so they will stay exactly where I want them to while I am sewing my fell line up at the top. And I'm probably going to baste this about halfway up as well. I'm going to baste this in a couple of places just so that these stay nice and flat, right where I want them. All of my pleats have been sewn into place, and I still have the bottom section basted together. So my next step is going to be to finish the under apron and the over apron. The under apron is going to be finished first. So the first step is to take the raw edge and turn it under about 1 inch and press it into place. And I'm going to be using a pressing cloth to do this, just to protect the material. The next step is to pin this in place, and then I'm going to be fell stitching it closed. Now I'm going to finish the over apron. And so I'm going to pull this back, and I'm going to take this material, this 5 inches that we have, and I'm going to bring it forward like this. And I'm going to pin this, and I'm going to leave the raw edge out about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to carefully pin this. I'm going to sew it all down on my machine, and then I will be able to start pulling the threads to create the fringe. And here we go. I have all of my fringe. It is off just slightly. And honestly, I really didn't think that it would be noticeable or make a difference once I fringed this out. And so I didn't bother to rip it out and re-sew it. However, you can still see that it's off a little bit. So note to self, if you decide to do this, make sure you have this lined up really well before you fringe it. But I'm still okay with it. I think it looks fine. When cutting out the waistband, the first thing you have to do is to determine that your material is right side up along with your skirt. And then you want to be able to match the pattern as closely as you can to the over apron so that it lines up nicely. You're going to have cut out 3.5 inches for your waistband, but you're going to add another inch for your seam allowances. And now it is time to cut the fusible interfacing that's going to go on the waistband. I marked the right size of my fabric with some X's so that I wouldn't get that mixed up. So I'm going to flip this over, and then I have my fusible interfacing, and you definitely want to make sure that you have it glue side down. Now this material, as you can see, it's really hard to cut. It sheds all over the place. But I'm going to try to get most of this off before I do it. And then you always want your interfacing to be just a little bit shorter or smaller than what you're gluing on. That way you don't get this glued to your ironing board. So I'm going to pin this into place before I start to iron it. I'm going to pull the pins out as I go, and I'm also going to use a pressing cloth on this, and I'm going to check one more time to make sure I have it glue side down, which I do. It's very important. I have my waistband pinned on right sides together, and I'm going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and I hope it comes out well. My main goal is for the front apron, the over apron, for the pattern to line up. The next step in this kilt making process is putting in the leather straps. Now, I looked high and I looked low, and nowhere could I find leather straps to purchase online for a kilt. Anywhere. So what I ended up doing is I purchased these faux leather kilt straps on Etsy. And, you know, they're pretty decent quality, and I think that they'll work pretty well. The problem is they're not the right shape that I want, because I want this strap to go inside the waistband, so I'm going to cut this down. It also only has 3 holes, so I have a punch here, and I'm going to add a 4th hole. I'm going to do that with both of them, because I am going to be putting 2 straps in, one right at the waist and one just around the hip line to help hold this together. I am now going to press in my 1/2 inch seam allowance for the back side of this waistband. Now I am just pinning this waistband into place, but I'm not going to sew it down yet because I want to get my Velcro sewn first, and it's going to be sewn on this part of the material so that you don't see it on the outside. But I need to figure out where the placement is going to be for everything, and I need to try on the skirt and check to make sure that my buckles all line up. Now I'm trying on the skirt to make sure that everything is lined up and is the way I want it. So I have my main line coming down the middle of the kilt, which is where I want it. I have marked my waistband here where I want to put the Velcro on the inside. And I also have my buckle here in place, and I've also marked with chalk where I want to sew the end of the buckle on. Now what I did is I've taken my waistband and I've pinned it on the underside of the kilt, and now I'm just going to use a fell stitch to stitch this in place. I have sewn in some Velcro to connect the under apron. Now that I have my faux leather straps sewn into place, the last step, not counting the ironing, is sewing this down here. So I'm going to do a nice fell stitch and sew this in. And now for the final step with this kilt, and it's ironing it, ironing in all the pleats. Now, if I had 100% wool, I could use a really hot iron and steam, and it would really set these pleats beautifully. However, my material is acrylic wool, and it can burn. So what I did is I took some scrap fabric that I had here of the tartan, and I just played around with my iron to see how hot I could get it without damaging the fabric. And I'm kind of at the midway point between cool and hot, and that's what's going to work for me. I am going to use a pressing cloth as well. Also, an ironing board just isn't big enough to press in these pleats, and so I'm using my craft table, and I just put two heavy-duty towels down underneath the kilt. So let's get this thing pressed. I am pressing the underside of the kilt first, making sure that I'm using my pressing cloth, and I'm just doing small sections at a time.
They already put it in. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
The scarf that I am wearing I actually bought while we were in Scotland, and it is from my family clan, Clan McLean, and so I thought I would include it in the video today because it does match my kilt. I am really happy with the way that the kilt turned out, especially since this is the first one that I have ever done. I did do research on this before I even started the kilt. Online I was looking for videos, and they had videos anywhere from someone going to their local thrift store and picking up some plaid flannel and putting some pleats in it and calling it a kilt, to old world masters who do kilts completely by hand, completely hand sewn, who have years and years of knowledge and experience and truly are masters of their craft. Making a kilt is an art form, and oh my gosh, my hat's off to those guys. My kilt falls somewhere in the middle, and I couldn't be happier with the way that it turned out. My sewing skills are intermediate at best, and I will say that this kilt, I found at times overwhelming. I came in with it thinking, it's a wraparound skirt with pleats in the back. How hard can it be? To opening up the pattern and realizing that there really isn't any pattern, and really trying to figure it out along the way. I am not sure that I will attempt to make another kilt. If I ever get another kilt, I would someday love to order one from Scotland that's made out of 100% wool, that's really done with the really deep pleats, and that's a dream of mine, and maybe someday. But I am really happy with the way that mine turned out, and I do look forward to wearing it next Christmas. My goal was to have this kilt done by Christmas, and I started it several days before Christmas. I'd say a good week before, and I realized that, yeah, I'm not going to get this done. This is going to take a lot more time than I originally anticipated. And so when Christmas was over, I said, okay, it's back to back to working on the kilt, and it took me another good solid week. So I'd say it took me about 2 weeks to make this kilt, and this was working on it every day. A lot of it was just time spent researching, trying to figure out what to do, how to do the pleats, how to tell the right side of the fabric from the wrong side of the fabric, trying to figure out how to put the buckles and straps in, how to get your waistband to line up properly. I did so much research on this sewing project, but in the end, I'm very happy with the way that it turned out. I apologize for the glare in my glasses. I really need to remember to take them off when I'm shooting the end of these videos. I would like to add that in the pattern for the kilt, when setting the pleats, they recommend that you lay the kilt down like on a tabletop and then lay a clean cloth or material over top of it, and then take a board and lay on top of the pleats, and then add some really heavy books on top of the board and leave that for at least 24 hours, and that really helps to set the pleats, and I will be doing that with my kilt as well. I would like to thank you all so much for watching today's video. I love and appreciate you all. And let's remember to love each other and to be kind to one another. And let's lift each other up and help make this world a better place. And I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.